Savvy, Chapter 34. The closer we got to Salina, the greener the world became, as rolling prairie transformed into rich, irrigated farmland. As soon as we'd found Samson behind the paneled wall in Carlene's trailer, Fish's storm over Tuttle Creek Lake had dissolved. Now the crisp white light of spring sunshine opened up the skies once more. But despite the sunshine and the brilliant green landscape, my thoughts were bleak and barren and black and white. All I could think about was Papa. Will Jr. and I sat near the front of the bus so that he could keep watch on his daddy's patrol car, and Fish and Bobby were across the aisle, ignoring the caseworker just behind them. Bobby was chewing her gum and painting her nails with red Mega Mart nail polish, cursing softly at every bump in the road, and Fish was leaning up against the window with his eyes closed. I knew he wasn't sleeping. I figured he was thinking about Papa, same as me. I couldn't get Officer Meek's words out of my head. I couldn't forget what he said about Papa. He needs his family around him now. It sounded terrifying to me. It sounded hopeless. Not being able to get past the officer stationed at the back of the bus, Samson had curled up in the front seat with Lil, his head in her lap. Lil was using all of the alcohol wipes from the new first aid kit to scour away the black ink from Samson's arms and hands. That ink burbled and shivered as it came off, pouring down the mayhem in my head into a single pointed voice that pierced my heart before being scrubbed away. Strong for Papa, strong for Papa. We had one last stretch of interstate to travel, a slow clip-clop countdown of miles and exits, and I had to bite my tongue to keep myself from asking, how much further, how much further, how much further? It seemed like an hour longer than forever before Lester followed Bill Meek's patrol car off the interstate at exit 252, passing a sign with a large white H that told us we were on the right path to the hospital. I trembled at the sight of that stark, bone-white letter. It meant we were almost there, almost to Papa at last. With a left turn that took us under the interstate and onto 9th Street, Bill led the bus into the town of Salina. The signal lamps at every intersection had been blasted out, looking now like upright rows of empty eye sockets. Cars crept and crawled across the busier streets, and traffic was backed up even though it was Sunday afternoon. Crews were out trying to replace all of the broken red, yellow, and green glass, and the city was obviously still struggling to recover from Rocket's electric wake. I swallowed hard. I'd never seen Rocket make such a mess. It made me shiver all the more. Maybe it hadn't been such a good idea for him to take Mama to Salina after all. I hoped that the hospital had plenty of spare light bulbs and that Rocket wasn't getting too close to any of the important life-saving equipment. We were all sitting up on the edge of our seats now, any last trace of drowsiness having vanished as soon as we got off the interstate. Without Bill leading the way, it would have taken forever to maneuver through the jammed streets. But Bill turned on his siren and even got out once or twice to direct the bus through intersections where frustrated drivers wouldn't let us pass. The afternoon sky, arcing blue as cornflowers over the town before our arrival, was now beginning to cloud over. Precipitation gathered from the corners of the atmosphere to take the shape of a small, dark storm cloud directly over the bus. But Fish held tight to his savvy with a strong and skillful scumble, and the cloud simply hovered grimly overhead, sending down neither a sprinkler nor a spatter. Bill must have called ahead to announce our arrival, for as soon as the big pink Heartland Bible supply bus followed his patrol car to the hospital's parking lot, stopping right in front of the large sliding glass doors of the entrance, we saw our families waiting for us. Pastor Meeks and Miss Rosemary appeared to be struggling between relief and anger, their faces going slack, then rigid, smiling, then stiff. Rocket and Mama were there too, looking haggard and sleepless. To my surprise, Mama was hanging on to a squirming gypsy, and Grandpa Bomba was leaning on Rocket's arm, holding tight to one of Grandma Dollop's jars. The pastor and his wife must have brought the rest of our family down with them, and I was grateful to them. It was going to be good to have everyone in the family together again. As soon as Lester opened the door of the bus, Mama set Gypsy down, taking her by the hand and rushing forward as we all began to climb down those 3 steep steps. "Where in the world have you all been? What were you thinking?" Mama cried as she grabbed Fish and Samson and me and held on tight, 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 crushing us together along with Gypsy like a big bouquet of flowers in a perfect hug. When at last she let go, she pulled us inside, fussing over each of us as if she were checking for any missing fingers or toes. "I wasn't worried," Rocket said, his face so lined and hardened that I knew not to believe him. He gave me a sideways shoulder squeeze and an unintentional electric shock that made me jump. His voice cracked as he said, "Savvy birthdays always tend to cause a rumpus." Then he punched Fish on the arm and mussed up Samson's hair, leaving it standing on end and crackling with static. It hadn't occurred to me until then that Rocket hadn't only been worried for Papa, he'd been worried about us as well. Guilt nearly crushed me. No wonder he'd caused so much damage. Grandpa Bomba stood, tears streaking his wrinkled face as he looked from each of us to the next. He held the glass jar with its faded label tucked into the crook of his arm, and I knew immediately which one it was. I threw my arms around my old grandpa, hugging him as hard as his ancient bones could bear. It's okay, Grandpa, I said. We're all together again, just the way we should be. Letting go, I turned back to Mama. Samson was at her side, tugging on her shirt. Ignoring Gypsy as she tried to pull her hand free, Mama bent down so that Samson could whisper in her ear. Samson's eyes were round and dark as he looked up into our Mama's face, and I could see his lips form the word that was on all of our minds. Papa? Mama's face dropped, the warm smile she'd greeted us with vanishing for half a second before being replaced with a very different kind of smile. The kind of smile born from love and sorrow and the desire to protect us all from our very worst fears. It's good you're all here now, Mama said softly. It was a mistake for me not to bring you with me in the first place. But Mama, I said, you don't make mistakes. Mama's face pinched and tightened as she tried not to cry. Oh, Mib, she said, pulling me to her again, I can make awfully perfect mistakes. Rocket dropped his head and stared at the floor, his knuckles white and his jaw clenched as the lights in the waiting room dimmed and pulsed once, but did not burn out or shatter. I'll let you all say your goodbyes, Mama said, letting go of me and wiping her eyes. Then we'll go up to see Papa. Let's just go now, implored Fish, picking up Gypsy and grabbing Mama's arm. But Mama stood firm. Running a hand absently through Fish's messy hair, she continued. Nothing will change in the next 2 minutes, Fish. You can say goodbye to your friends. A sobbing wail drew my attention. Nearby, Miss Rosemary was trying to rein in her dripping tears. She dabbed her eyes with a white handkerchief and took turns squeezing Will and Bobby to her, while Pastor Meeks kept his eyes closed on his hands clasped together, looking as though he might be sending up a silent and mighty prayer of thanks. Bill had joined us all inside the waiting area, hanging back a bit during the emotional family reunion, watching keenly as Miss Rosemary clucked over Will's black eye like a mother hen. But when Pastor Meeks finished his prayer and opened his eyes, he reached out a hand, giving Bill's a firm shake and pulling him into the group with a hearty thump on the back. As soon as Bobby could, she detached herself from her mother and sidled closer to Rocket with a smile, looking at the way my brother's t-shirt stuck to him with static. Rocket noticed Bobby's smile quick enough, and despite everything, he managed a half smile back her way. I remember the way she talked about my brother in the pool and watched to see what Bobby might do. Hey, Rocket, said Bobby, pushing her bangs out of her eyes and shifting her weight onto one hip. Hey, Bobby, said Rocket with a nod, a stray spark of blue popping at his fingertips. Bobby noticed that spark even if no one else had. Smiling wider and raising her eyebrows, she pulled the gum from out of her mouth and stuck it on the back of a nearby chair without taking her eyes off my oldest brother, as though getting herself ready to kiss him then and there while she had the chance. But before Bobby could say or do anything more, Miss Rosemary grabbed hold of her daughter's arm and pulled her away from the rest of us. Miss Rosemary's tears shut off like a faucet, and she railed, You're in enough trouble already, Roberta. Don't go asking for more. Then she looked at us Beaumonts as though we were devil angels sent to lead her children astray. The shiny gold minivan was parked outside, and all Miss Rosemary wanted to do was to restore her life to the proper order and get back on the road to Hebron with Bobby and Will in tow. Lester and Lil were standing in the open doorway of the bus, peering past the sliding glass doors of the hospital to watch the reunion inside with broad smiles on their faces. Lester stood on the step behind Lil with his hands on her shoulders, and I could just tell by looking at them that they were going to be all right. But I hoped I'd get a chance to see them both again someday. It wouldn't seem right not to. I'd made it to Salina. I was finally there. Even so, I had a feeling in my chest like my heart was breaking up, like it was turning into nothing more than a big ball of melon that could dissolve into little watery chunks at any moment. It felt disjointed and downside up to be parting ways so abruptly with all my new friends. All I could do was wave to Bobby and Will as the preacher's wife dragged them out of the hospital. Just before the sliding doors slid shut, Will caught my eye with his own quick wink. I realized I'd been seeing him again at church next Sunday, or hoped I would. I hoped you couldn't get kicked out of church for making bad choices, or for knowing you'd probably make those same choices again if you had to do it all over again. I hoped that God could understand my reasons for doing what I'd done better than Miss Rosemary had. Before following his wife out of the hospital, Pastor Meeks shook Mama's hand. He shook Grandpa's and Rocket's too. You'll all be in our prayers, he said with a stern nod to the rest of us. Thank you, Pastor Meeks, Mama said to the preacher, trying to suppress a wistful smile as the man's hair filled out with Rocket's static, standing straight up off his head. As soon as the older man turned to leave, Officer Bill Meeks stepped toward us. You kids stay safe and keep out of trouble, all right? Then Bill shook hands with each of us, even Gypsy, before he left. At the door, he looked over his shoulder at me and nodded once before following the preacher out of the hospital. I watched Bill through the clear glass doors as he stopped briefly to exchange words with Lester and Lil, then strode over to say his own goodbyes to Bobby and Will as they climbed up into the minivan. I liked Bill Meeks, and I was glad that Will wanted to grow up to be just like this daddy. On the Heartland Bible Supply bus, Lester's shoulders began to twitch. He was ready to be on his way. Lil blew us a kiss, and Fish and Samson and I all waved back at her. At last, it was time to go find Papa.